Lovely. All right. So again, thank you all for taking the time to meet today. 3 o'clock was literally just an arbitrary time that I had free on my calendar. So thank you all for kind of taking the time to meet with me. Again, not going to go over a whole lot in this meeting. I do want to make sure that everybody is kind of squared away with at least the beginning phases of what they're going to do for their industry project. Not necessarily refining any ideas today, but just making sure we understand kind of where we're supposed to be at with that and what we're expecting over the next several weeks with that project. It is really kind of an independent case study project, right? So it's not necessarily me walking you through it at this point. I mean, everything is really kind of a review, and you'll see that on Blackboard. All of our modules are review modules, so the theory reviews and that kind of thing. So it's really kind of up to you to synthesize this entire project, right? So and you've seen the instructions on Blackboard, and so we'll go over those in a little bit more detail in a second. But the project is going to come in 2 parts or 2 phases, right? So you have your proposal, well, technically 3, but you have a proposal phase, right? Which, if you'll notice on people in as they come in, you'll notice on the on Blackboard in your instructions, your assignment sheet is broken down into 4 different sections, right? So you've got part 1 through 4. Your proposal section for the project is parts 1 through 3. All right, so part 1, part 2, part 3. So it's essentially your intro, your lit review, and your methodology, right? And that's your first part. And we'll talk more about those individual sections in a little bit. But so that's your first part, right, of the project. And just so everyone's kind of aware, they're on your course schedule, the deadlines and everything, but the deadline for that first proposal, so parts 1 through 3, is October, I wrote it down, October 11th. That's a Wednesday. All right, so you've got about, you've got a while to work on that. And really, that's kind of the main sort of substance of the project, is those first 3 sections. So, and again, we'll talk more about those in a second, but, and then your final project, which is kind of those first 3 sections, plus your discussion sort of implication section at the end. That's your second part, is just that sort of discussion section that comes at the end. And really what you're doing there is explaining, what you expected to find with that research, how it would impact the industry, and sort of any limitations, implications. If you've ever read through any kind of academic research article or anything like that, done any of these sort of studies like this, it follows a very similar structure to that. The only difference is we're not really running the experiments. We're not necessarily going through IRB, doing all that kind of stuff, because that's just too time consuming. And particularly for the industry, you don't have to do that. Right? You don't have to go through all that sort of, rigmarole to get subjects and that kind of thing. You're there actually more trying to solve a real issue, right? And so again, that final project, which is all 4 sections combined together with appendices, with your sources, with your title page, the whole completed document. I think I said the deadline for that was November 15th. So November 15th. So you've got kind of a month between submitting the first 3 chapters and submitting that final piece that has all 4 of them. All right. So without getting too far into the details of those 4 sections, which we'll do in a second, everybody clear on that? Right? We're good on those deadlines. Okay. And one more thing sort of that I'll give as kind of a deadline-ish adjacent thing. After Labor Day, so that's on Monday, so maybe like the 5th or 6th, so maybe next Tuesday or Wednesday, what I want from you guys, and it will make more sense after our conversation today, but what I want from you guys is to at least have some sort of idea of the direction you want to go with your project, right? And I'll show you guys some example projects as well, so you can kind of see what people have done in the past, how they're structured, what that looks like, and the types of research that has been done before. And things I need you to just remember about this is that we are not necessarily conducting an experiment. We're building one out, right, with a methodology and a lit review and all of that, but we're not necessarily pushing that out to test subjects to actually achieve results. What you're doing in this project is essentially showing me that you're able to notice a problem or a trend or an issue within the industry, ad PR, marketing, all of it, whatever it may be, and develop a system to actually potentially address that issue, right? there's one thing about this sort of applied research where in the field, you're able to actually see a problem, build out a test that can actually potentially address it, and then sort of present that to your bosses, to your C-suite people, and say, here's how we need to fix this. Should we do this? Can we do this? Do we have the resources to fix it? Right. So we're focusing, getting away from the academic side of it. And there is academic work here. We'll talk about theories and models and that kind of thing, but mostly focusing on how to actually address an issue in the industry. Right. That's the whole point of this project. But without me saying too much more on that, everybody clear kind of in the preliminary stuff? Yeah. Cool. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, I think. How does that work? Yep. Share. Y'all see my screen? We're good? Yep. Cool. All right, so I'm going to close that. And this is just our Blackboard shell, right? So, I mean, you guys have seen this already. You guys have seen this document. This is posted in the Module 1 folder that just talks about creating the research project. And again, I'm not going to read this to you guys. You guys can sort of work through this on your own, but just contextually want to kind of talk about each of those sections and what the expectation is for those sections. So everybody's kind of aware of, the real ins and outs of it more than kind of just what's written here. But again, essentially what we're doing for this project is you all, whether you are currently working in the industry or are looking at entering the industry when you finish your degree, whatever the situation may be, you all have access and the ability to sort of do an analysis of what's going on, right? Looking at what's out there in the industry, looking at these different sort of organizations and companies and brands and influencers and users and all this kind of stuff. Looking at that based on, what you're currently doing in your job, right? You see this stuff every day. If you were looking at entering the job market, you're actively looking at positions and organizations and looking at culture and things that they're doing, things they've published. And what your goal is here is to find an issue, right? And when I say issue, that tends to mean something negative, right? But it's not necessarily, we're looking at solving a problem necessarily. What I mean by issue is that looking at the industry as a whole, and when I say industry, that's the whole umbrella of sort of Marcom, organizations, right? Just doing an audit and kind of saying, what's going on in the industry? What's something that's interesting to me? Again, either in the industry that I'm currently working in, or an industry that I would like to work in, or an industry that I am interested in learning more about, whatever that may be, and finding an issue. Right? Finding something, kind of finding a niche or a hole or something that you could potentially work through the process of finding a solution for, right? So for example, I mean, if we were to look at public relations, just kind of in general, at the industry as a whole, we know that industry skews very heavily female, right? That's just the nature of the industry. We also know that disproportionately, your higher ups in these agencies and these sort of C-suite executives are generally male in these same very female driven offices and corporations and brands. We know that there's a huge discrepancy between in leadership, right, among the gender on gender bounds, right? So we know that a lot of our executives are male when all of our sort of underlings, right, are females, the ones actually doing the work. Why are they not moving up, right? And this is just a very clear, very basic example of an issue, right? And maybe in your organization, you've noticed that as well, right? Maybe you've noticed that there is a lot of leadership on top that is very, male driven, and everyone else is being, that they're bossing around is a woman. Or you could say the same thing about looking at it from racial lines. If everybody on top is an old white man, and everybody underneath them is a person of color or, whatever sort of background, then that's a discrepancy as well, right? And again, not necessarily saying that's happening in your personal industries, but just saying across the board, that's kind of an issue that we've seen, right? And when we look at the examples here in a second, you'll see a lot of work on gender and DEI and sort of those type of issues because they're very prevalent in what we do. All right. So, but again, going off on a tangent, we are looking at that type of issue, right? And it can be as broad or as specific or as niche as you need it to. All right. But what you're going to do in this first part here, right? So part one, you're explaining the context of the problem, right? So again, what the thing that you've noticed, the issue that you've seen, the issue that you would like to learn more about, that you've experienced personally, or that is actually happening in the industry, whatever it is. Describe the issue to us. Tell us a little bit more about it. Give us some background on that issue. Again, related to you specifically, or just kind of related to the industry, right? We need kind of both. All right, particularly if you've been dealing with that issue personally. But again, describe the issue or opportunity that you'll discuss in your deliverable in terms of the importance to the understanding of the industry, right? So what we're doing here is you're providing details about that issue. Give us details about the number of instances, what the nature of the issue is, how this potentially came about, the number of instances where this has occurred within the industry, the number of organizations or corporations in which this has happened. If you're working in sports, right, there's a lot of issues with women in sports as well. So you'll notice these things kind of across the board, but again, they can be specific or as broad as you need to, right? So that first part is literally just kind of an introduction to whatever problem it is, whatever your issue is, with background information and any sources you need to kind of support that with data, okay? Because one thing that we do need to do is actually provide statistics, data, real information, right? It's, if it's a one-off thing that you've observed in your, particular industry, that's great, but there's got to be more. There's got to be more, right? We've got to support that with some data out there, and you can find that data relatively easily, I think. Anyway, just contextualizing the problem, like showing us what the issue is in that first part. So think of that kind of as the introduction to the project, right? Then moving into the second part, this background information section, that is what we're going to call sort of your lit review, right? So again, in the traditional academic sense, you are looking at sources that, support what you're saying. And one thing that we're thinking about here is we want to actually think about some sort of theoretical premise or model, right, that we could potentially use to explain one, how this has happened, to show particular instances of this happening through messaging or whatever it may be, or, how it kind of developed to where it was. So you guys have taken courses, in theory, whether it was like, 550, 551, 522, those courses where you kind of talk about fundamental theoretical models and premises, right? And maybe some even in your reputation and brand strategy classes that you'll cover some models and things in there. But what we need, if we're talking about background information, right, you're going to actually look at academic and industry literature, again, that discusses the problem. So for example, if we were going to look at hiring practices for public relations agencies, geared toward serving underserved populations, right? Trying to diversify our workforce, right? One thing that we potentially could look at is the actual messaging within our job descriptions, right? Are we actually promoting this idea of diversity, that I put in air quotes because diversity without action means nothing, right? Are we actually promoting that in the language that we're using and in the visuals maybe that we even publish on our social media or, other public facing outlets, right? Because saying and doing sometimes are two different things, right? Sometimes it's just performative. Admit, okay, more people. Is it just performative, or are we actually encouraging, a diverse workforce, right? So what you could do there is look at something like, visual framing or framing theory, right? And how we actually frame the literature of our job postings. Maybe you would audit that or do sort of a content analysis of that to see if we're actually doing what we say we're doing. Or if you were looking at something like visual framing, are our public facing comms efforts, representative of the ideas that we're actually trying to relay to these new employees, right? So there's ways to kind of look and apply theory to what you're doing. Now, that is just one example, right? And y'all's examples will be much more diverse than that. But also looking at industry literature, right? So you guys have seen all these sort of things from like PR Week and PR Newswire and all these sort of white papers, all these sort of industry pubs that come out with reports on things like diversity, on things like gender equity, on things like, executive leadership practices, that kind of thing. That's what we mean by industry literature, right? So again, looking from the theoretical side, the academic literature will come into play, and then looking at kind of the meat of the issue itself, that may come from some of those industry reports and industry data points that come out pretty regularly. So, but again, what we're doing in that background situation is giving more context to the particular issue that you are researching, right? But you do need to have some kind of theoretical premise or model or something. It doesn't have to be anything super specific either, like you can get as specific or narrow as you want. You could look at just the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion in public relations or advertising, right? That can sort of frame your argument, right? Or gender issues or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be necessarily like a very specific framing theory or cultivation theory or theory of, whatever, right? You need some sort of framework to build out your project. All right. And you'll explain that in that second section. Have I lost anybody so far? Yeah.
I just have one question. So, when you're talking about the theories, ideally, would you like more than one, depending on what our topic is, or would you like us to really just hone in on kind of like one theory and just dig deep into that?
Yeah. So it needs to be contextual and whatever that means to you, right? If you need to include more than one, I mean, theories, again, don't really explain anything, right? All a theory does is kind of, put something out there that says we've observed this, over and over, right? It doesn't prove anything. So if there is more than one model or more than one sort of theory that you think would come into play to, support your argument or sort of bring a stronger argument forward. So for example, I'm a media effects person. So like I tend to think in terms of cultivation, framing, agenda setting, those kind of things. So those all kind of work together, right? So if there's a way that you need to sort of merge more than one together, or even something like narrative theory, which is just the idea of storytelling, right? For persuasion, right? You can use that as a thing too, and then sort of build in framing, agenda setting, whatever, to sort of build on top of that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, and again, it doesn't even have to be anything super strict theory. Like if you wanted to focus on diversity or focus on, anything that's just kind of an overarching theme, you're welcome to do that as well, as long as there is supporting literature to back it up.
Sounds good.
Yep, cool.
Thank you.
Anybody else on that one? Good. Okay. And again, it'll make more sense as you start actually thinking about what you're trying to do. You'll find ways to sort of craft or hone the project around that. And we'll talk about your outline kind of situation when we get to the end. But so again, part 2 is just that background information. So again, think of this as like your literature review. So this is where most of your citations will come from. Most of your sort of background information and your data points will come in this section. So when we think about your works cited, your citations, most of that should come from this part. Now, there will be some smattered in and out the rest of your paper too, but if you're trying to get your citation count up all the way, a lot of that will happen here, like a traditional lit review. Okay, so then we get into kind of the more people. Then we get into part 3, which is kind of the actually doing the thing of the research paper, right? So it says proposed methodology here. So again, describe the method you would use to answer the proposed research questions, including a rationale for its use and the strengths and weaknesses of the method. So for example, if you were trying to gauge sentiment about, the effectiveness of male leadership in your overly, female driven office, that's a weird way to phrase that, but just go with it. One thing that you could do for that would be something simple like a survey, right? You would send out kind of just a climate survey, right? To reach whatever audience you think needs to see that and get sort of a sentiment from there. Describe how you would recruit participants, again, depending on the situation and, if it's within an organization or not, if you're looking kind of at the industry as a whole, how you get participants for whatever method you decide to do. And it does not have to be a survey. You can do something like a content analysis, or maybe you wanted to set up a focus group, something like that. Any of those methods would work, either quantitative or qualitative, depending on, again, what you're looking at. How you would recruit participants. So if it's an industry-wide thing, you may just send it out, in an industry publication, right? And hope for the best, or send it to contacts in different agencies or something like that, right? But again, if you're not using something like human subjects, if you're doing something like a content analysis, how would you choose your sampling frame? How are you going to choose, what social media posts to analyze versus others, right? What websites how are you going to choose a website to look at versus some other organization's website? So if you're using human subjects, again, how would you recruit them to take your survey, attend your focus group, whatever it may be? Or if you're not, with something like a content analysis or other methods like that, how would you choose the frames that you're actually going to like analyze, right? So just give me some of that information. And again, describe the design of your study, including, what are your independent, dependent variables? How would you execute it, right? How would you just, distribute it, that kind of thing. And how would you analyze the data? So for example, if you were to put together a survey, right, you would need to actually put the survey together for this project, right? So if you decided that your method was to develop a survey for whatever audience that you want to see it or to take that survey, you actually need to develop that instrument, right, as part of this project. And you can include that as like an appendix at the end of your paper, right? Or if you were doing something like a content analysis where you were going to analyze, social media posts or internal messages from, whomever, how are you going to analyze this? What does your code sheet look like, right? And so you'd actually need to put that code sheet together. If you were to do something like a focus group, you would need to actually put your questionnaire together with your focus group questions. Again, submit that as well, right? So whatever, and again, those are just 3 examples. So whatever method you choose to do, and again, when you think about your method, think about how you can get more information from like a primary research perspective to help solve the issue. Right? That's the whole point of this sort of methodology. It's like, how can we actually get more information, get more research, get more data from our audience, right, to potentially address that problem? Okay, that's the whole point of all these methods. We're just pulling more information from sort of a primary research perspective. Okay, and any kind of thing you develop, any survey, any code sheet, any ad treatments, for example. So if you were to do some testing between, the language and the verbiage in one job posting versus another, and you were actually going to put those ad treatments together to sort of test them side by side, like some A/B testing, you would need to actually put those ads together. Does that make sense? So anything that you're using that we're going to test, would potentially test, you need to include those as appendices. And they can be as complicated or as simple as you want, as long as they accomplish the goal. There are really good AI survey generators right now. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying you can, right? There are AI focus group question generators. There are AI code sheet generators. It's wild, right? Maybe that's what you all research, is how AI is screwing us all over, right? Who knows? But so there's that, right? And so that's those first 3 sections. So really what you're doing in that proposal, those first 3 chapters, is putting the project together, right? At a level that you could essentially implement that project in your workplace, in your industry, right? It's ready to go. You could, put it out there tomorrow and it could get results, right? Again, we're not running these tests for our purposes, right? Because that would require IRB and all kind of crazy stuff. So we're not doing that, but get it together in a way that it is as close to finished or as close to perfect as possible, right? To actually solve the issue. And then all you do at the end, I'll give you a yes or no on that proposal, keep going or, revise some things. And then all you do at the end is that part 4, which are implications and discussion. So why did you do what you did? Why did what you did matters? How did it potentially help solve the issue in the industry? What limitations did you face? And if you were to run it in the future, how might you address those limitations? Right, very straightforward. All right. And we'll talk way more between now and then about that last part, but just know that's kind of what we're looking at. And again, just looking at the specifics of the project, this is only like a 20-page document, right? So this is not like a super intensive, like master's thesis level thing, right? It's very sort of concise and to the point. And again, any reference pages you have, I think I said in the last time I taught this, we need about 25 sources total for the project, which should not be difficult to come up with at all for that amount of copy. So references, about 25, and your appendix. So again, anything that you put together, for your methodology, your survey, whatever it is, include that as an appendix. Okay. APA style, is just expected at this point. So you guys can figure that out. And again, this is pass fail, right? So the biggest thing is I'm not trying to fail you, right? That's not a thing that is going to happen. That's not a thing that I think would happen. I've never failed anybody in 598 yet. So don't be the first. But it's pass fail. And so what we'll do is sort of consecutively, I'll give you the go ahead, to keep working on your project. And then at the end, when everything is submitted, at that point, you should have gotten feedback from me. You should know where you're at, right? And then once you turn in everything, you'll get your sort of pass fail grade. And I will fill out paperwork for you on behalf of the grad school saying that you can graduate. Congratulations, roll tide. Ugh, right. So there's that. On that same note, unrelated but related, the graduation application deadline is October 6th. So if you've not put in your graduation application and you're planning on graduating in December, definitely get that filled out before the 6th. And I think the 6th is like the hard deadline for that. And that's just for your graduation application. And your proposal is going to be due that next week. So that was the 11th, I think, right? So keep that in mind. Any questions so far? I've got some examples that I can show you just so you kind of know what topics have been covered before. None of you should really be working on the same thing, right? There's enough, you do different stuff, you're focusing on different things, your theories and everything are going to be different enough that there's no reason why you should be working on anything too similar. There will be some crossover in terms of theoretical premises and that kind of thing, but so just know that those, just work on something different, right? And I'll make sure that everybody's kind of on that same page when we get there. All right, I'm gonna share my screen again. I'll show you guys these examples if I can. There we go, share, minimize that. All right, and you'll see there's a lot of diversity in what we are looking at here. This paper from Michael Goodner, he didn't really put a title on his, which was annoying, but essentially he works for a Parks and Recreation administration out in Texas, and he did something very similar to what we were talking about with job postings. He was looking at hiring lifeguards for 18 to 22-year-old lifeguards, right? And nobody was wanting to apply. He was not getting any applications. And he framed it kind of around the argument of sort of the Great Resignation, right? How nobody, that was a big buzzy thing last year where nobody wanted to work or whatever. And so he essentially did exactly what we were talking about. He did some different ad testings with language and visuals in one that were very different from another. He put those together, was going to test those to see which ones performed more effectively and which ones would be more effective in encouraging more applications to his actual workplace, right? So very clear work-based situation there. This one's interesting. So gender-based marketing versus gender inclusion, case study of the impact on gender representation in advertising. So this is Kim Simmons. She was really focusing on the idea that a lot of brands do performative advertising, meaning that they say that they are doing, things to reflect gender inclusion and that kind of thing. But really, it's just one campaign, and then that's kind of it, right? And so she did sort of a content analysis of some social media posts from different brands like Dove and all these other well-known sort of gender inclusive brands. And, said, is this real or is it just kind of performative? Does it actually reflect their sort of mission statements, right? As a company, is this part of what they're doing? And are they actually encouraging that through the visuals that they're sharing? Or is it kind of performative in a way that is meant to get views and clicks and more money, basically, right? So she did kind of a side-by-side content analysis there, trying to see, how much of this is authentic versus how much of this is very performative. So that was that. Tabitha Bostic, who actually works here at UA in our strategic communications office, she was actually really concerned. I don't know if you guys have heard about the idea of this demographics cliff that's coming up. In terms of higher ed, it's basically the result of birth rates being lower and not as many people going to college and that kind of thing. So people are really concerned about this, especially, in higher ed, because there just aren't students coming to college at the same level that there has been over the last 25 years. And so it's essentially, you can see the trending numbers. They really do just kind of point downward. And so as a person who works in communications here at an institution of higher education, she looked at the idea of branding and how much, effective branding and effective brand recognition influences a student's likelihood of attending an institution. We know this is a football school. We know this is a sorority school. We know that people don't come here to get an education half the time, right? But that branding is super important. I mean, those ideas, those notions that people have about the institution really do affect their likelihood of attending, right? So she looked at that and what factors were important to parents and to students and that kind of thing to potentially address this demographics cliff that's coming up. Jennifer works at sort of a community relations organization, a nonprofit, and she said it was full of white people, and that she wondered how much more effective their promotions would be, how much more effective their board could be, right? If diversity was increased, like if there were more diverse people on the board, diverse donors, that kind of thing. And so she was looking at what factors matter to potential donors. It is a more diverse board membership or more diverse membership in the organization beneficial to sort of donor relations, to what extent, that kind of thing. So she was trying to increase diversity within her organization. So that was good. And then this one was interesting from Roxanne. She works at LSU in their sort of agricultural communications. LSU is a land grant school, so very focused on ag. And she was actually looking at, this idea of misinformation around science that has gone on kind of in the post-COVID landscape, right? People don't trust science as much as they used to. So in her working in a scientific communication situation, said, what can we do, in terms of our brand to make sure that we are reputable and recognizable in that space as being credible and as being honest and truthful in our communications with so much mistrust going on. So really interesting project here. So you can see between the 5 of those that there's a whole lot of diversity kind of in what people were looking at. And I like that. I appreciate that. There were 12 people in that class. I think that those were just 5 examples, but it ranged from healthcare to DEI to hiring to, all kind of stuff. So it really is up to you what you choose to focus on for this project. I don't care. You have to justify it to me and rationalize it to me to make sure that it works. But outside of that, it's kind of your oyster. It's up to you to kind of figure out the direction for that project. And so, like I said earlier, what I want from you guys kind of after Labor Day, I won't make y'all do it before the long weekend, but be thinking about the direction that you want your project to potentially go. There is availability for you guys to set up one-on-one meetings with me on Blackboard. It's kind of on our homepage, that little Calendly link. So if you click that, it shows all my availability for the semester, I think, so far. So if you need to set up a meeting, I think they're 30-minute blocks. Feel free to do that. And up until you turn in your proposal, I am fair game. So, you've got access to me. Once you turn in your proposal and start working on that kind of discussion part, I'm kind of out of the picture. But up until that point, I'm happy to help you, finalize a topic or to talk through some potential methodologies or theories or models, whatever it may be, to make sure that you're getting where you need to go with this project. But again, I want you to kind of at least have some sort of an idea of where you want this project to go by next week. All right. Because again, that'll give you kind of the whole month of September really to kind of dig in and sort of push through on that. So what I would like for you to do is, like I said, I think by Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, you don't have to turn anything on Blackboard. Just email me kind of an outline or a potential kind of process you think that you're going to work through. Give me your topic or potential topic. Give me, what kind of theoretical or sort of overarching theme or model you're going to use with that topic. And also potentially some sort of methodology that you're going to use or would potentially use to sort of get more info. Okay. Again, you don't have to have any of that stuff finalized. I just want you to have a rough idea because we can sort of pitch back and forth in a meeting and get it more squared away. But for now, I just want to make sure that we've all got something that we can start working on. And what may help also is to just start looking at sources, just start Googling, finding some sources, just seeing what's out there related to the topic that you want to choose. If you have no idea about a topic that you want to work on, just search for, current issues or trends in, communications, marketing, whatever. And you'll be able to find some really industry specific issues that are coming up. AI is going to be one. Right, just in general. I don't want all of you working on AI-based projects because I would claw my eyes out. But that's an issue, right? That's something that you could think about. So whatever you choose to do, just give me a short little write-up. Just email it to me sometime next week after the long holiday, and we'll kind of go from there. At that point in that email, if you want to set up a meeting with me, or just let me know that that's something you want to do, we can sort of figure that out as well. But I just need to kind of know where you're at next week. All right. Anybody have any questions? I know we kind of talked about a lot, and I won't keep y'all much longer, but any questions, comments, concerns about this project? You're going to do fine. You're going to produce good work, and everybody always has, and it's always very interesting. And it needs to be something interesting to you because you're going to look at it for like the next, 6 weeks. So make sure that you're interested in it. Make sure that it is something that you think actually would make a difference in the industry, in the workforce that you either are in or want to enter when you graduate, right? You have the ability to sort of change things. If you don't like something, tell me why and fix it, right? So we'll kind of just go from there, right? Anybody have anything? Yeah.
The examples that you just showed us, will you be able to put any on Blackboard that we can just like skim through just to see kind of how they wrote it or like set it up?
Yeah, I'll put all 5 of those on Blackboard just in a folder so y'all can look at those. And again, if you're thinking about the outline, Michael's looked kind of straightforward. So in that paper, he had like the theories, he had the topic, whatever. So that's a good example to follow. But again, in this preliminary thing, I don't really care how you structure it. We just got to get you, working on it. Yep. Anybody else? Are we excited? I know I'm excited. And again, what I want you to know is like, I'm here with you throughout this process, at least until October 11th, right? So we should be fine. Anybody
I
else?
just have something, this is like random, but I wasn't able to access the welcome video on Blackboard.
This will be it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, and there were only like 2 people on that orientation thing the other day, so I didn't even bother recording that. So, but this will serve as kind of this for y'all, and this will be there for y'all to look through whenever you need to. All right, guys. Well, I won't keep y'all any longer. But if things come up, if you are just completely lost over the next few days as you start working on a topic, feel free to reach out to me. We can Zoom, we can just email back and forth. It doesn't really matter. But I want y'all to start off on a strong foot. So if you do have any issues coming up with a topic, let me know. All right, y'all. We'll chat soon. I'll post this video at some point in the next day or so on Blackboard. But if anything else comes up before then, just let me know.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.